and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. I look around the world today and I shake my head a little bit here. It seems like the world, in what we call reality, is continuously in the process of undermining what we're trying to do. Kind of undermining our potential, undermining our dreams and objectives, just kind of the best laid plans of mice and men, that whole, saying. Can get tossed out the window pretty quickly. My guest today, Gwen Aspen, is a quintessential entrepreneur, and I wanted to have her on the show because she really kind of demonstrates how to rise above negativity and self-doubt. I mean, her story is really inspirational. And one of the things that I'm very aware of is that one of the surest ways to quash a dream is to have a mindset of scarcity. And that is something that Gwen has, actually dealt with quite successfully. She's the co-founder and CEO of a company called Aniquium LLC, and we'll talk a little bit about that. It's in the property management sector. But that's, I think, just kind of a side story to what I wanted to have happen here, which is a conversation about how you got here. So I want to just welcome Gwen Aspen to the show. Gwen, it's great to have you on.
It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you, Blaine.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Before I jump into any questions I might have about kind of your journey, like I said, I often, before we started recording here, I often will preface things with just a question. When you hear the soul of business, what does that bring up for you?
For me, it's the values that the business is built upon. And for our business is a relationship business. So I think about relationships first, relationships and people, and we're big on our values, which have a terrible acronym, but it's KEYDOG: kindness, integrity, diversity, own the outcome, and growth. And we talk about them incessantly at Aniquium, and everything that we do revolves around those values. And any kind of problem that we encounter, we want to make sure that we're always living by those values first and foremost before we make any decisions. So I think that if a business is to have a soul, it is to be clear about what its values are and to live them every day.
And the everyday piece is the devil in the details sort of a thing. I've told this story a number of times. Listeners to the show will probably go, "Oh no, not again." But when I was consulting with Nokia back in the late '90s, early 2000s, any meeting I ever had with him, and I worked with him for about 12 years as an external consultant, but any meeting I ever had with any country group or headquarter group or whatever, if we had two or more Nokians in the meeting room, there was always a reference to their articulated values, the ones that they had, up on the wall and all that kind of stuff. But it wasn't artwork. They used them, as you're describing here, as ways to vet decisions, to inform what are we paying attention to? Why are we paying that whole question of the for the sake of what? So, and I've worked with a number of NGOs and nonprofits that literally do the same thing, as well as for-profits. The values become a living part of what they do, not an add-on or not an adjunct or not just artwork on a wall. So how do you actually, and I'm not sure what the staff size is with Aniquium, but you've got a remote workforce. I mean, you source out of a number of different countries. How do you keep the values in front of these people in a tangible way?
Well, basically, whenever there's a problem or an issue, instead of answering the problem or issue, we try to go back to the values. So I think it's best demonstrated by an example, like something that really happened.
Yeah.
So we do remote professionals from Mexico for the property management industry. And the people that work at Aniquium, top of the line professionals. So we had two co-founders that got in a disagreement and they were going their separate ways. And both of them wanted the remote professional very badly. So they had asked me to kind of get in the weeds of their drama with them and withhold information from the other. And they were not in a good space. They weren't their best selves. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
So, and they wanted me to play the game. I refused to play the game. And it was, I think it was confusing for me and the staff, because there was one that was like the primary person. He'd given us a lot of business. He'd given us a ton of referrals. So we definitely would have normally prioritized his needs over the other person. But when you go back to the values, it's about integrity. So that's one of those issues where I was like, look, I'm not keeping secrets for anyone. You guys are co-founders, you're 50-50 owners. This employee is both of yours. Any information you tell me or our staff is going to be public information to the both of you. So there will be no secrets in this negotiation. And I'm not going to play this game. And I risked, in telling the employees this, we risked that this guy who is very social media would say something bad about our company, would drag us through the mud. But when you go back to the values, none of that matters, because you have a belief that it will all work out in the end.
Yeah.
If you stick to the values. So since then, one of the guy's wives got involved and told him he was being a jerk, I'm pretty sure. And so he has continued to be a huge referral source for us, even though he did not end up with the remote professional in the end.
Yeah.
So that's just an example of many. We have 1,300 employees. We have over 400 clients. So there are lots of examples of this that happen every day. But I like to just empower the employees to also make decisions in the same way. And we're not afraid of making mistakes, as long as we stick with the values, and no one gets fired at Anna for making a mistake, but you would get fired for covering it up.
There you go. Yeah. The whole idea of conflict and conflict, friction's another word for it. There's friction in the system, sort of a thing. And friction generates heat. Heat generates light. And if it's managed well, you've got illumination on an issue, and you've got a way to actually clean it, which is what the heat can do. I mean, people get a chance to put their point of view out there, and ultimately you arrive at some consensual decision that actually benefits the entire organization. And in my experience, that's one way that leaders keep themselves and their people connected to the soul of the organization through the values conversation. Is that a fair assessment of what you would say actually happened? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
we wouldn't allow secrecy. So, like, secrecy is what happens when you're not living in the values, right?
Yeah.
There's a secret conversation, like secretly tell them XYZ. So if you are committed to transparency, committed to owning the outcome, whatever it may be, good, bad, or ugly, life works. It works easily. Scaling's easier. Everything just kind of operates more smoothly, is my experience, and you sleep a whole lot better.
And my word for that is elegance. I mean, if we as leaders leading our organizations pay attention to elegance and minimal to no unintended consequences, what we do is we actually find ways to surface potentially conflict, speed bumps. we can surface them and not be adverse to saying, no, let's talk about this. That's where elegance actually begins to come into play, is you're surfacing things that leaving them unacknowledged can really sideswipe what you're doing. Now, it may require that I have to start over in some areas, because, all of a sudden there's new information available. And that starting over thing, I want to just kind of explore that a little bit with your personal story. Yeah, sustainable success, in the way I define it, is about developing the capacity to continuously start over in the face of things that go sideways. And as I started in the introduction with you here, the world and reality and the nature of the whole thing out there sometimes will knock us for a loop. It undermines our potential, undermines our plans. Can you give me some examples of, as an entrepreneur, how you're a determined mindset and a willingness to act? How has that actually come into play for you?
So willingness to act. So I think that what happens is people come across, and we do in business every day, a challenge, something doesn't go well, someone makes a mistake, you lose a client, something,
Yeah.
someone didn't abide by the values. But willingness to try again the next day with the same earnest intentions that you had the day before.
Yeah.
And I think self-forgiveness comes into play a lot too, because I think people think that there's a benefit to hating yourself when you screw up. And what I've found over time is that benefit is very minimal. It's important to feel shame if you did something wrong, right? Like fully feel it. But at a certain point, I think self-forgiveness and moving forward helps us get away from the paralysis that happens when we have too many things going on, many options, a lot of emotions flowing through our body, and some shame too. It results in paralysis.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the worst thing for a business. Moving forward, even if it's not pretty, maybe it's an undignified moment, is really the answer, is just put that next foot in front of the other.
Yeah, you got to keep moving. Yeah, I deal with high performance athletes. One of my partners used to run one of the largest sports marketing agencies in the world, and we've had conversations with high performance athletes like Marshall Falk and Warren Moon and a number of these folks. And one of the things that has always struck me is that these high caliber athletes, and I don't care what the sport is, when there's a mistake, when something goes wrong, they don't, the self-talk. It's not this recrimination, this continual, oh, I should have done, how could I have done it? They quickly let go of it and and step back up, get back on a horse, and what can I learn from this, and not beat myself up as you're talking. And in the domain of leadership, this is my bias around this, but consciousness is the first cause. Effect. The reality that I see out there is the manifestation of a consciousness. And if my self-talk is negative, if it's continuously reinforcing a negative sense of identity, you screw up, you'll never get it right. That kind of stuff, it ends up manifesting itself in the world in a very destructive and counterproductive fashion. And doing that, that's kind of, you're talking about, oh God, I screwed up. That seems to be a natural human condition. How did you learn to quickly move beyond it and let go of it? Because you have. I know that is a fact.
So it has not been easy for me at all. I definitely had, like everybody, I think it's the human brain, right? Is designed to keep us alive, not to make us happy. But my methodology is journal writing, as nerdy as it sounds.
No, that sounds great.
So I have so many journals that I've had to throw some of them out, because since I was 13 years old, I've been.
Wow, you've been doing it that long.
Yeah, like every day.
All right.
And they're not cute. Like I have it right in front of me. It's just a regular 99-cent journal. But the journal writing is how I process negative emotions and move past them to maintain focus on the goal. And that's the only way I know how to do it. But it has taken continual practice, just like I'm sure the athletes that you work with, they're practicing every day, and they're not just practicing the movements, the physical, keeping in shape. They're also training their brains to think in a way that supports their success.
Yeah.
And not being a negative Nelly, seeing how you have a limitation, like maybe kind of a secret or underlying limitation that's not real, but that you've somehow placed on yourself or from your past, it was given to you. Seeing those and then working past them is huge for any success.
Yeah, I love that. And I journal as well, which is why I lit up when you said it. One of my favorite books in the world is Marcus Aurelius's Meditations.
Oh, it's so good. I love that one too.
It's a private journal. He didn't write it for publication in any way, shape, or form. It was kind of how he worked out what was going on. And he would, chastise himself on paper and then kind of go, what can I take out of this? And then come back out, and away we went again. One more time with feeling.
And the brilliance of that. And it was
Yeah.
so long ago. And you're like, gosh, this is so relevant today.
How do you, I mean, okay, now your company, you've got, 1,300 employees. Most of them are remote, if not, well, you've got a core group at the headquarters.
Almost all of them are, yeah.
Okay.
Almost every single, on a hand, you can count the
On a
people.
hand, and the ones that are, I saw a couple walking out the door in the back of you here a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
A lot of organizations, I started working with remote team concepts. I mentioned Nokia. I started working with remote teams back in about 95 with them, 1995. And we were this was one of the very first experiments, literally one of the very first experiments in working with remote teams across the planet. Now, there had been, geographic locations that were separate in the same city and that kind of stuff. But, when you've got a development team that is based in Helsinki working with a coder that is in Shanghai, with a marketing person that is in Moscow and with somebody in South Africa, it's kind of like, you got time zone differences, all kinds of stuff. Your perspective is that remote teams can actually be a secret weapon if you can leverage them well. What's the secret sauce here? Hi, I'd like to ask you to do something for me if you wouldn't mind. If you like this episode, I'd like you to not only subscribe on your favorite site, but I'd also like you to give a rating. Ideally, a 5-star rating would be greatly appreciated. But I think more importantly also would be just some comments. That helps with the algorithm and it helps build the audience with this. And more than anything else, if you could invite somebody else to listen, just share this episode with a friend, with a colleague. And I'd like to see how we can grow the soul of business. I think it makes a difference. Thanks.
Now, one of the assets that we have at Anaquim is that we're all more or less on the same time zone, right? Because it's Mexico, so give or take an hour. And I am a big believer that it's helpful to have everybody working the same office hours, because then you can get a hold of people, you can have a quick meeting. And so that has created a level of ease for us that you may not have had at Nokia, because you guys were on very dramatic different time zones. So I am a believer in that piece. But what I think the real secret sauce to remote teams is that it incentivizes all the best management practices. So you're really managing by key performance indicators, not just butts and seats, as I've heard it called. Not just seat time, but you're like, what does winning look like in this role? And you measure whatever that looks like. And then you have to be very specific about the job descriptions. A lot of sand in the gears of businesses is that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, because the jobs morph over time and then it gets messy. And so when there's clarity about who does what, and there's clarity about winning and what that looks like, when the goals are really clear of the organization, and you have regular meetings to discuss any barriers for success. And we use the EOS model, and so that's been very helpful. We use the 90.io software to keep all the teams organized and on the same page. And when that's laid out, which is business best practices,
it is.
Remote teams can flourish, and they can flourish better because there's less drama. You're not mad at someone because they warmed up gross, fish in the microwave. People's bad habits are bothering you. And it allows for a more diverse workforce, because people with small children can, make their lives work a little bit easier. So, and then they're very grateful because they have a job that accommodates their life. So for us, it's been a win-win. And for our clients, it's been a win-win. And we've watched organizations go from little tiny startups to huge organizations with these remote teams. So we know it can work. There are a lot of people right now that want to say it doesn't work, but I think those are measures to they want to get rid of some of the employees. And so this is a way to do it without hugely compensating people by layoffs. Secondarily, commercial real estate's going to be a lot of hurt by April, I think, is like what people are talking about. if people don't go back to offices, and old school managers
Yep.
haven't done a great job changing direction, which there is a different management style when you work remotely.
Yeah.
And if you can't accommodate to that, you're not going to like remote work. So I think those are three of the reasons why people are against it. But I know that if people are intentional about it, they can be more successful than they ever expected.
I concur. There was something that you said as you were describing this, that it revolved kind of around the roles and responsibilities and clarity around that. But even more important, in relationship to KPIs, the key performance indicators and whatnot, it was ensuring that they win in their roles, that they're winning in their roles. That becomes real personal to the individual. And it has oftentimes little to do with the company's goals and objectives, although, those are certainly in play. There's no question about that. But if I don't feel as if I'm winning, you're not going to get the best out of me.
No, absolutely not. It's really important that they are connecting their personal goals with the business. And
How do you do that?
It's actually not extremely hard. I think one of the ways is having them give you a vision board and talk through their personal goals, and then be clear, like, look, I can't take you from here to there in every way, shape, or form, but as I'm building your role, as we're talking through the company directives, if I know what your goals are, I could move you to something closer to your end goal. Or I can show you how this task that we're doing right now will benefit you in the long term for your larger goal. So when you can make those connections because you know what their larger goals are, that makes a big difference. And even the effort, they're just like you actually care about me, because you're trying to, even if it's kind of silly, they're like, okay, nice try. That wasn't, it's not exact a link between my actual goal and this job, but I appreciate the effort.
Yeah. It's kind of like you took me into account. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think just that personalization of each person and seeing them as a individual. Another thing we do with remote workers is we ask all the clients to ask them, like, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite sports team? Ask personal things about them so they feel like they're really part of the team. And when they know those things, they can, for a birthday gift, send them a hat with their favorite team or their favorite candy or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things are really important to get to know each individual so that they are totally on board with everything that the business is doing and they feel cared for as an individual.
They feel cared for. They recognize, seen, and as a consequence of that, they're more willing to speak up, I'm assuming. And so you begin to get stuff out of the field that you wouldn't have access to because people actually they're caring about what they're doing. They see how the functioning of this organization actually benefits the goals and objectives I have in my life. So I want to make sure that thing functions pretty well. So they're going to voice up.
Yeah, the psychological security that it gives when you care about them as an individual does make a difference in their quality of work and their loyalty to the organization.
Well, that kind of opens up another potential Pandora's box here, which has to do with hiring. I remember an event. Oh, this goes back a number of decades. My sister, she's long retired by now, but she worked for a bank, small regional bank, which was acquired by a larger regional bank. And she called me up one day, just madder than a wet hen, to use an old farming term. But I said, sis, what's up? How come you're so upset? And she says, well, my new boss wants me to do things that's not my job. And what they were doing is they were flattening the organization so that they could create more transparency, reduce siloing, and actually increase efficiency and effectiveness. But her role and responsibility in the old bank didn't make room for that. And also her identity, who I am and what where I belong here. You're asking me to do stuff that doesn't match that identity. So an employee like that, working from a remote perspective, my guess would be there would be some onboarding conversations that would need to take place either prior to the hiring or immediately following to make sure that they were kind of integrated into what you're doing.
100%. I think clarity on the front end. And look, in today's business world, and especially because we're working with a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, roles morph really quickly. Like if a small client takes on a new big account, any individual at the company's new job could be all that account when they were doing, XYZ before.
Yeah.
So flexibility is really important in today's, international technological day and age. And I actually think it's going to be the most important thing with AI coming online and being more effective. The jobs that we have today are not going to be the jobs that we even have 3 years from now. So flexibility, open-mindedness to possibility, open-mindedness to conversations about new ideas, new tasks, new ways of thinking is going to be what separates people who are really succeeding in this new environment and people who are going to struggle a little bit more. So I think this new day and age we're living in is going to require all of us to be really open-minded about what's possible.
Yeah. And, that whole question of identity, who I am and where I belong, that's, the difficulty with change isn't the change itself necessarily. It can be very disruptive, but the disruption occurs to existing relationships. And that's where people get wrapped around the axle, in my experience, is the relationships get perturbed. The change itself is the bogeyman. But until they can square the circle around how do I relate to this differently? And part of that relational dynamic has to do with identity. How do I re-identify? Yeah. And if it's a change in work process, okay, where do I belong in this? So that relationship dynamic comes back into play. I've got to assume, and I'll have egg on my face if this isn't true, but I've got to assume that a large part of your effectiveness as a leader in your organization is because you innately learned how to pay attention to the relational quality, the relational dynamic of that your people were actually engaged in. Is that a fair assessment, number one? And number two, how did you actually find yourself doing that, if in fact it's true?
Yes, I think relationships are really important. And one of the number one things that we did was right when we first started, people weren't really using, and you remember this from your Nokia days, we weren't using video conferencing.
Right.
Which was a real shame, but you can see people's facial expressions if you have a camera on culture, which we do. And so as a manager and working with people from many different countries, some countries don't want to tell you you're wrong or that your idea is bad. That can be something that has some cultural differences. So calling out those facial expressions has been really important, I think, in making sure that if there is an elephant in the room, it gets revealed. So they're like, hey, you look really resigned. Can you tell me about that? Or you look unhappy with what I just said. What is it? So calling out those emotions supports the effort to understand where people are, how they're feeling about their relationship to the group or the organization or whatever it may be. And also any identity issues they're having if you're changing their role because of business conditions. That identity thing is huge. I think it's one of those things that when we were talking about scaling a business, and I told you journal writing was one of the big things.
Yeah.
Even for me, as the businesses have grown, getting used to my new role of the organization, a lot of the writing is about reintegrating with the new role that I have and any ways that I was maybe showing up smaller than I should because of old habits or old beliefs. And so I think that identity conversation is really important, especially in a time when things are changing at such a fast pace.
Yeah, one of the things that points to is, one of the foundational elements of emotional intelligence, which is self-awareness. And if I have got mechanisms in place where it causes me to pause and reflect, I can begin noticing things. And in that noticing, other choices become more visible. And that's where growth comes into play here. So a question
I just read a book about that. That's one of my radical acceptance.
Radical acceptance, exactly.
Tara Brach.
Yeah, Tara Brach. Yeah. Yep.
That book is like all about what you just said, and creating that pause before you respond so that you can be self-aware and respond appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, in this AI is going to transform all of business, but that self-awareness and those human qualities are not going to go out of style. In fact, I think in today's day and age, they're more necessary than ever. Yep. And so the more people can work on their personal skills, their self-awareness, their ability to respond and not react, the more they're going to be really needed in the new day and age.
The question that I'm going to close off here with has to do with the consequence of growing a business. And I say consequence in this sense. How do you stay connected to that original spark as you grow? Because it morphs, the organization morphs, and it requires attention in a different direction and attention in a different way. And that's very seductive, and it can take us away from that kernel that was inspiring to begin with. And I'm making a distinction here between what motivates you. Maybe it's the shareholders' desire for an ROI, but what inspires you that keeps you coming back in the morning? How do you stay connected to that as the organization grows and the demands increase for you to do certain things?
Well, we've always had two real jobs if you drill everything down. One is to create amazing jobs in emerging markets, and the other is to support small, medium-sized businesses in their growth trajectory and on their journey. And I think everything and anything that, because of scaling, that gets convoluted or gets complicated, if you're really clear on your true mission, it gets clear and simple very quickly. Yeah. And so I always think it comes back to the customer and making sure that the customers have a great experience. Yeah. They're the ones that we that keep our doors open and keep people employed. And so delighting the customer at the end of the day, and that may change with time. It's not delighting the customers different this year than it was in 2016 when we began the business. So making sure that we're always adding value, delivering to the client, and keeping life pretty simple. It's values and mission. Yeah. Then all the other stuff, just you're reminded how silly it can be. Yeah. And it just kind of keeps you grounded. And I guess that's where I always go.
That's great. I love that. Gwen, where can people find out more about both yourself, because you also speak? So where can they find out more about you if they want to have somebody come in and actually talk to them about some of this stuff, but also Aniquium itself?
So aniquium.net, we're there on the internet. And then also for LinkedIn, Gwen Aspen, if you want to LinkedIn me, I'd love to chat with any group about, developing their businesses, scaling, growing.
Great. And that's Aniquium, ANEQUIM.net. Okay. So I'll have that in the show notes, folks. Gwen, I love this. I could carry this conversation on for some time. I really could. This has been great. We've got a couple of other shows that I'll send you some invitations to. One that I do with my business partner, David Meltzer. We'll see if we can get something worked out for an office hours episode.
Amazing. Thank you, Blaine.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. You've got a great story, and I love entrepreneurs that are actually sharing what they're doing, and they disabuse people of the complexity of it. It's actually pretty simple. It's not rocket science, but you need to be able to do a couple of things. Stick to it being one of them. Yes. Stick to it being one of them. So, folks, Gwen Aspen is my guest today. I want to thank you for listening. As always, as I close off here, find a way in your life, in your week, in your day, to be a center of distribution, not a center of accumulation. That's how the world works. That's how nature works. The world works because nature works. Be a part of nature. Be a center of distribution, not a center of accumulation. And I'll see you on the next episode. Thanks for listening.